Okay, guys, this is going to be my review for the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Commando. Commando was interesting because I just figured, I'll watch this. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and these big action blockbusters. Love action films. In the '80s. Okay, I'll give it a shot. But surprisingly, I felt like there was a big lack of action. And there wasn't, like, the story was generic of, kidnap, someone you love, and you just go into action. There's no real story. It's just like, chasing these bad guys down and defeating them. It played very much by the books in that. But I was surprised at, again, like, the lack of action. Because they're, okay, they go on the, they have, because, and every little mini action sequence was, 30 seconds long. It wasn't like there was any big action till, the third act. So you're left with this, this weak story, this generic story of, that doesn't really go anywhere. It has, again, poor action moments because there's no real action sequences. There's a whole, the biggest thing in the beginning was the mall stuff. But I think what was weird is, I also didn't get the role of Cindy. The role of Cindy. I think it's Sydney or Cindy, whatever. The girl in the movie. Not the daughter, but the other one. I didn't get her role because it's okay, I get, she works at an airport. Then, Arnold tells her to do something. But then she just and then Arnold's like, I'm doing this for my daughter. And it involves mercenaries. And then she's like, yeah, I'm okay doing that. I'm okay going because it's your daughter, that's motivation to go into a war zone. To me, that was very much of a because movie. Because we need someone else besides just Arnold. It never felt logical. They never gave her a logical reason to do the stuff that she did. Because she put herself at risk of death for someone she couldn't trust. And for a girl that, was her daughter. But again, how can she trust, Arnold? It made no sense that she was so willing to put herself out there. And that just felt like a big movie decision than a logical decision. But nonetheless, the third act did offer the action with the great shootouts and, the rated R violence and the fist fight between him and, the other guy. But what was weird about the final fight between Arnold and the mercenary, I remember Arnold was codenamed Matrix. But anyways, against that other mercenary type guy at the very end of the film, the last kind of fight. What I didn't get was he was pointing a gun at Arnold, right? Instead of just shooting him, Arnold was defenseless, he was on the floor, cuts, wounds. He puts the gun away and takes out a knife. That, again, a lot of decisions made by the film felt like movie decisions instead of logical decisions. I think it felt like, how can we write this scene? And they can't have the cake and eat it too. They can't have, we want Arnold to become defenseless. And you want Arnold to have a shot. Either you commit to Arnold, having to find another way out. It felt like this movie was very cheap. And that they made the most basic ways for Arnold Schwarzenegger to get out of these different situations. So get out of the situation. Someone pointing it at you? Just make the character who was pointing at the gun at him put the gun away. As soon as that happened, I'm like, what idiot. Because yes, we all knew Arnold was going to save his daughter. That was a no-brainer. So as soon as the guy put the gun away, I was like, oh my god, on hindsight, not even in hindsight, because this film was so predictable. You just knew, okay, he's gonna die. But again, that final act gave you that action. But it's a good final act, with all the action, all the stuff you wanted from this film. But one act that's not even great shouldn't warrant this to be that great of a film. I enjoyed it. I love, Arnold's one-liners, and honestly, the score and soundtrack was, pretty cool and whatnot. But one good act cannot make up for two acts that I thought were pretty lacking because, again, I think really for the lack of action. And I know that's crazy to say, considering this is an Arnold Schwarzenegger action film. But again, it was short in action. There were action moments. tipping over the car, or fighting, the guy in his hotel room, or, blowing up the police truck. But they were moments, they weren't sequences. And it felt like this film maybe was too cheap to have these big sequences. They're like, oh, here and there we'll do an explosion. Here and there we'll do this. But I think what I love is because this was in 1985, and I say this with a lot of old classic films that I've, been watching for the first time over quarantine. But because this was, older before, prime CGI, a lot of it felt and was practical. And I think I always am a big fan of practical things because you just don't get that anymore. And it makes it feel more real. Whether you notice the visual effects in modern films or not, there's just an instinct that you realize that scene, that shot felt a lot better and a lot more cool because that was actually filmed. It was authentic. But yeah. So again, the first two acts were, the story wasn't, there's no real good story, so when it's not really action, I didn't really care. There wasn't a lot of action, but the third act turned up the action. I liked, the soundtrack and score a little bit, like, again, like the 80s, I told this before, but it almost feels like a genre in itself. Arnold Schwarzenegger in this role, great one-liner, so there's good enough things to enjoy that this film was enjoyable overall. But, problems fluttered throughout. Stay tuned for videos coming at you.